Hello and welcome all to the Politics of Cinema, the show where, you guessed it, cinema and politics go hand in hand. My name is Aaron Spears.
And I'm Isaac Miller, and on this episode we are continuing our exploration of art horror with the Babadook.
So as we mentioned on our first episode, we talked about The Witch. We kind of went through and defined art house horror, which we don't need to do on every episode in this kind of mini series we're doing here. But, it tends to be a bit more atmospheric in tone, a lot of metaphor and symbolism used, less plot-driven, more psychological, kind of trauma-based, a lot of character studies. And I think within that, the Babadook, fits squarely into that description.
Right. No, and I sort of think of it, and maybe I have this wrong, I think of it as sort of one of the significant films signaling the wave, along with sort of It Follows.
Sure.
In 2014.
Well, because the Babadook had its premiere in January at Sundance, which in the art house world, which we both came out of, working at the same art house theater. The Sundance Film Festival is the kickoff for the year. I mean, it starts in January, so January 2014, Babadook plays there. I don't remember it winning any awards there, but obviously this type of film, it generates buzz. And so I knew it to be, I don't know if it was necessarily the term art house horror in 2014, but it was probably tossed around because it was going to be an art house theater. It was coming out of Sundance. This wasn't going to go to the multiplex necessarily. And it was always like, when you think Sundance Film Festival, I do not generally think of as horror. I know they have a midnight movie kind of programming that they've done. But just usually in the independent world, you don't get too many horror movies. I think that's one reason why art house horror in the last, we'll say 8 to 10 years is really fascinating, because it's not necessarily a genre that you get at the art house all that often. Same as when Super Troopers came out, that played at some, independent theaters and art houses. You don't think of slapstick comedy as an art house genre. It's, it's meant for serious movies and foreign films and documentaries. So the Babadook made quite a splash at Sundance. So I was highly anticipating and looking forward to the film when it eventually came out. I think it was a spring. I want to say it was May or June when it finally came out in actual theaters. And unlike The Witch, which we talked about on our previous episode, the Babadook, to my recollection, did not go to the multiplexes the way that The Witch did, and had that whole, it didn't have the pushback from the audience of what? This isn't about witches, sacrificing children and bathing in blood and blah, blah, blah. No, it's an atmospheric, art house horror, as see our previous episode on The Witch.
I mean, actually, they do all those things in The Witch.
Well, they do, but not the way that it was marketed. The way
I know.
I'm
just messing, but
yeah. But the Babadook, since it went to the art house and then did slowly expand, I don't remember it playing at multiplexes, but it may have hit a few, just because that's when she saw it was making money. Let's get that out in more theaters. But I just remember people terrified coming out of the theater, especially the late shows, and just hanging out in the lobby for a little bit, talking with whoever else had seen the movie, because you want to talk this movie through as soon as it ends.
Right. It's a lot. It's a lot. So I watched it. The first time I saw it was in, I believe, 2014, when I was still living in Cairo, which I lived in for 3 years, with a grad school friend of mine, in her apartment, eating Pizza Hut, which is better in Egypt than here. Or
wait, yeah, I was going to say that that gives me pause in the conversation.
Look, first off, there is some good pizza in Cairo, but pizza is not really the thing, right?
Sure.
It's not, it's just, it's there, but it's an import. It's not, Pizza Hut is a sit down place. Okay. It's not cheap. Regular people can't go to a Pizza Hut in Cairo.
Really?
Oh yeah. That's going to be true with a lot of your sort of fast food chains. Is they're not, they're not really in the reach of I think a lot of people. But no, literally, it's a sit-down place. I think we swear it was better in Cairo. I don't actually know that that's the case, but
I'll say, is that just one of those homesick flavors that you're oh, this does taste like back home?
Yeah, that's true. That is actually a lot of what was going on there. But I remember watching it because I watched a lot of. This is my friend Shannon. We watched a lot of sort of horror movies and genre movies together, and it was pretty. It was. I remember being really struck by it at the time and really impressed, because I just hadn't seen that many horror movies like that, and her not being quite as much impressed. I don't know.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, before we jump fully into the Babadook and all the, all the stuff that's there to chew on in that movie, we did want to check in as we're going through the month of October, watching a lot of horror films from all around the world, from all the different genres, to see what kind of genres you've gravitated towards since we last recorded. Any particular sub genre within horror that you've explored, Isaac?
So you have taken a very targeted aim at horror. I have been sort of just watching I had a preset list, and I'm watching through that, and it's just covering some bases that I wanted to cover. So I'm actually not going to really talk about movies that I have been watching. Well, I can mention a couple. So since we're sort of doing the genre hunting more broadly, I'm going to mention one of my favorite little niches in horror, which is 80's vampire movies, as opposed to 70's vampire movies. So by the 80's, you sort of fully escaped sort of like, well, you haven't totally escaped the legacy of like Hammer horror or whatever, but like that's sort of what you associate with vampire movies. I feel like through the 70's, or through at least the first part of the 70's.
Well, if anything, when you get into the later 80s as well, you have the VHS and home movie revolution. So there is access to a library of titles in your living room.
Right.
So yeah, I think that tends to work in a little bit more mid and late 80s as far as influence goes.
Yeah. But what's interesting to me is how varied and sort of genre interesting a lot of the vampire movies of the period are. So,
Okay.
you know, Tony Scott's The Hunger, which stars David Bowie and Susan Sarandon and Catherine Deneuve.
Sarah Roberts is in jeopardy.
Hey, lady, how about it?
Stay with her. Help her, for she has begun to feel the awful horror of the hunger. John Blaylock, the hunger, has given him everlasting life. Until now, pray for him. Miriam Blaylock. She feeds 1 day in 7 on the unsuspecting, and soon she will turn into something that you will never be able to forget. No matter how hard and how long you try, fear her.
What have you done to me?
Forever and ever.
And life signs terminate right here.
The timeless beauty of Catherine Deneuve. The cruel elegance of David Bowie. The open sensuality of Susan Sarandon. Combined to create a modern classic of perverse fear. Haunting, mysterious, sensual, strange, perverse, riveting. The Hunger.
Which is about as goth as anything you will ever see. It's wildly goth and sort of dark and abstract and great. You have Tobe Hooper's Lifeforce, which is, if you want to watch naked space vampires absorb all of London at a go, this is your movie.
From the director of Poltergeist and the writer of Alien comes a terrifying new film.
I'm getting a very small radar cross-section.
150 miles long. EGR's confirmed.
Tell them we have an artificial object out here.
In the tail of Halley's Comet, there's something wrong. Something ancient. Something evil.
Jesus.
Houston, we have a problem.
Something's happening to me.
Something hungry that's brought to Earth.
She's destroyed worlds.
That girl was no girl. She was totally alien to this planet in our life form. And totally dangerous.
I was gonna say that's sort of a mix of a spoiler, but it's also like if that's intriguing to you, that's the movie for you.
Yeah, and I mean real naked a lot. It's got a young but still quite bald Patrick Stewart, and it's not good. I'm gonna say it. I enjoy it thoroughly for all of its elements, and not the sum of its parts. You have Fright Night, which I think is very well known in sort of horror communities. Sort of like, Rear Window plus classic Hammer horror, and really paying homage to sort of your not just Hammer horror, but sort of sort of classic late night horror shows that don't really exist anymore, but even when I was growing up, were just on their last legs. And I honestly, I think Chris Sarandon as the best sexy yuppie vampire you're gonna see. Like, he's real hot, and he's real like 80s sleaze.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
What would you do if you accidentally discovered the house next door was occupied by something not human? Something horrifying. Something unspeakably evil. No one believes you.
Mom, I didn't have a nightmare.
Not your mom.
They did kill a girl over there.
Not your girlfriend.
Charlie, is this some sort of a trick to get me back?
Not even the police.
Look, I know it's crazy. I know that, but look, Lieutenant!
It knows that you know. You'll do anything to protect yourself, but it will do anything to protect its secret. Fright Night. If you love being scared, this could be the night of your life.
It's sort of perfect. And then, the most, honestly, I think maybe the best known of these and the most iconic is The Lost Boys.
Oh, yeah.
Joel Schumacher. And the truth of it is, it's not that great, but I think it goes down real easy. It's a lot of fun. Also, god damn the 80s with their muscular saxophone playing men on the beach. I mean,
oh, God.
It's great.
Worst.
It's so good. I mean, this is the thing. Is like, what's happening?
Michael and Sam have just moved to Santa Carla, California. They're about to discover its secret.
Notice anything unusual about Santa Carla yet?
No. It's a pretty cool place. If you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
I'm your brother, Sammy. Help me!
Stay back! Stay back!
What's happening to me, Star?
Get yourself a good sharp steak. Drive it right through his heart.
You're a vampire, Michael. My own brother, a damn blood-sucking vampire.
Oh, you wait till Mom finds out, buddy.
When a vampire bites it, it's never a pretty sight.
Michael, they're coming!
And, there's a certain degree of like uninhibitedly, who gives a fuck? This is ridiculousness. Yeah. And in 2020, that actually feels pretty good. So that's a lot of fun. I don't think it's anywhere near Fright Night level or as interesting as The Hunger or quite as weird as Lifeforce, but it goes down easy. And then I think maybe the greatest of them all is Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark.
I'm gonna separate your head from your shoulders.
Do it fast.
All right.
Good times roll. No!
You might as well just kill me then, too.
Caleb Colton no longer belongs to our world.
We give him a week to see if we can call him one of us.
He belongs to hers.
But you have to learn to kill.
He belongs to theirs.
I want to kill. He makes you kill tonight.
And they all belong to the night.
It's 3 hours short for a bus ticket home. You help me out? What are you on? Believe me, I told you.
Just don't think of it as killing.
Amen.
Don't think at all. It's just something that you do night after night. It's only ever a question of time.
You're nervous. I would be too if I were you.
Near Dark.
Could be your boys falling in with control. Check out time.
I was going to say, you mentioned Catherine Bigelow on the previous episode. I was like, you remember saying, because it was the vampire, you said Western?
Yes, it's the vampire.
Okay.
It's a vampire Western.
Yeah.
Very low budget. She basically borrowed the cast of Aliens, a large portion of the cast of Aliens, and it is absolutely superb, and you should check it out. So I think it's an interesting period for vampire films. I think, honestly, when I first noticed that a lot of those movies were sort of clustered together, I was thinking, like, is there like a mini vampire revival in the second half of the 80s? And I suspect it's just because there's vampire movies are just movies that come out.
Or it's just, one's a hit and then everyone's like, oh, hey, vampires are back in fashion.
Right.
So you get a whole bunch of other ones too, to varying levels of quality usually.
I think if anything, I think it's a stronger point for the genre.
Oh, like that era specifically?
Yeah. Then again, the 70s is really strong. All right, I could go on vampires. What are your picks?
I focused in actually, as you mentioned, it was a bit more targeted. Yours is targeted. You have a list and you're sticking to it. It's always commendable on the way to go because I have more lists for film watching than I'll ever actually be able to get to. So coming off our 60s series where we went from what was like 62 to 69, watching stuff in chronological order, you rattled off a whole bunch of 80s like Fear of Suburbia films last episode that I was like, you know what? I was like, I even joked in the show, I was like, I've watched none of those titles. So I was like, you know, there's here clearly a gap here. Tis the season. Let's jump in and watch some of these. So honestly, the first one I jumped in and watched because I was talking about summer of 84 and kind of that fear in the suburbs in the 80s and the whole cultural climate and political climate the country was experiencing in the 80s. I watched Fright Night first because also you had highly recommended it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right about Chris Sarandon. I forget the actor's name, but the Charlie, like the next door neighbor, the teen, just had no charisma to me at all. So luckily you've got Chris Sarandon there doing his, like you said, sexy yuppie vampire. And it was kind of a fun, it was, it went down real easy for like an hour or so. But once it kicked in with the actual, Fright Night, late night, like kind of cable access show, like you said, I was like, oh, I'm on board because I used to do a cable access show and I find that to be a really awesome format. And that was really fun. But then also once you get to the actual effects, like it clearly saved the budget, the payoff for the third act with all kinds of interesting gore effects and practical makeup. That was so much fun to watch because I'm sick of the digitizing of everything. Like I like just do the effects. When his best friend is it just evil? It's his nickname.
If you can call him his best friend, that is maybe one of the most,
or not best friend. Sorry, his male friend.
His male
evil.
friend. And could I just say this is a compliment to the actor? That is one of the most obnoxious performances I've ever seen.
I know he's a teen in the movie, but like I know from 85 is the minute he was on screen in his first shot, I was like, did he just do like 4 lines of blow and then come do his scene? Like this guy couldn't sit still. He couldn't stand still. He's like cackling with laughter every minute. And I was like, dude, tone it down. Or did the director tell you to, amp it up? What is going on?
But that's what I love. It's just like, what is happening? This is the most punchable teenager I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And it was such a weird disconnect. You're like, what scene do you think you're acting in right now? Because it was just so weird. Because everybody else in the scene like kind of knew what the beats were, and this guy was just like, oh, you think every scene is the climax? Because then when he got to the climax and he was acting as like the wild vampire, and then turns into a dog or werewolf or whatever by the end. Again, all great practical effects, especially when he gets was it like a broom handle or a shovel handle like through the chest, and he's slowly morphing back to a child who's now dead. Great stuff. So I specifically went then to 1980. I wanted to start in the 80s. Number one, because Friday the 13th came out and I'd watched the original one ages ago. So it was basically a new movie to me. So I started with 1980 and I realized, holy shit, 1980 is like a watershed year for horror films on a number of levels. One, because Friday the 13th came out and the cultural impact of Friday the 13th and its series looms very large over the 80s because it started in 1980. So I did Friday the 13th part 1 and 2. I may go to 3, even though 2 was such a fucking bore, because I still have yet to get to where Jason puts on the mask.
I can't help you there. So here's the thing is this, I tend to watch a decent number of slashers, but I'm not a slasher person, which means I don't tend to work my way through the series because, whew.
Well, at this point, I'm already 2 in. I was like, maybe I'll just keep those in the background. I was like, all right, I'll knock off maybe like 3, 4, or 5. I did watch one of them at some point. The only scene I remember as a kid watching it was Jason grabbed someone in a sleeping bag and like smashed them into a rock or tree or something. So he had the mask on then. So I was like, I was expecting it in 2, and in 2 he doesn't. He's got like a pillowcase over his head with one hole torn in it. I don't know why I didn't go for 2, so he could see out to still kill people. But those are pretty interesting. But so my kind of genre hunting focused in on specifically the year of 1980, because you have Friday the 13th comes out. It's also the year that The Shining comes out. Stellar example of art horror. It's also the year of The Changeling, which you've already mentioned a couple times. Hugely influential, but also again more in that like what did you call it? Like more like prestige horror.
Yeah, and I've realized So I think I mentioned this last time. I watched Don't Look Now. I watched The Innocents for the first time, two like basically masterpiece level movies, and then I watched Kuruniko, which I've been meaning to watch. And when I realized, and then you think about The Changeling, it's like a disproportionate number of like the classy art level horror movies are ghost movies. Partially because I think look, vampires, all of these allow for amazing thematic things you can do, but death is sort of an easier one in some ways.
Well, it's also, and I think we're going to get to that with the Babadook in just a moment, but like it's also something a bit more universal where some people be like, yeah, vampires are not real. Who gives a shit? Blah, blah, blah. Which people could be dismissive about ghosts. Like, oh, ghosts are not real. But like people have always been like, everyone's been spooked by like that bump in the night or what the hell was that? And they can't really explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do the ghost story right, specifically like the movie called A Ghost Story, one of my favorite movies of that year, that it can be very haunting because it taps into that inner fear of just the unknown rather than like, yeah, vampires aren't real. I'm not worried about, my neighbor being a vampire. So then you also, Friday the 13th series kicks off, The Shining, The Changeling, John Carpenter's The Fog. His I would say, I wasn't watching at the time, but very anticipated follow-up to his, smash hit Halloween, The Fog, comes out in 1980. That one was interesting because I actually watched that one after I'd watched Friday the 13th Part 2, which was a little bit of a cheat because that was 81. Then I went back to 80 for The Fog. But the craft, like The Fog is inherently goofy to me as a premise. And I think some of it's a bit clunkier because of performance or whatever. But John Carpenter's craft is so evident. And just in the first scenes of that movie, we're like, oh, it was just refreshing. Like, okay, this filmmaker is putting together a story and experience. And he knows what he's doing. I don't necessarily think all the parts work in The Fog, but it's still a lot of fun to watch. And I'm just like, oh, good. Somebody knows what they're doing and they're trying something.
See, this is part of it. I think sometimes this is what shows a great filmmaker is you can talk about John Carpenter's, you can talk about The Thing, right? Which to me is a perfect film. You can talk about sort of his, the highs, but it's the mid-rangers that show how good they are in a sense. And I think you could say this about someone like Spielberg, right? Like you can tell, like of the Jurassic Park movies, the first 3, the second one is not very good, but you know who made that movie.
Sure.
The Fog, I think, is better than that. But I think, I think it's that it may not be like reach the heights. It's also like a living EC horror comic from like from the 1950s.
Which you brought up to me before when we were just talking about, what we're going to talk about on the show today. And I was like, man, in my head, I was like, if you turn down the color watching The Fog to black and white, it's totally a 50s movie.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, there's a little bit more gore than you'd get away with in the 50s, but I was like, oh my God, that really, really is. And I'm sure you could have done The Fog as some sort of like weird, like red, communist panic allegory or, something like that in the 50s. And it probably would have been quite a hit.
Yeah.
So you have The Fog. There's also Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. Enough said on that. If you know that one, you know that one. If you don't, you're probably better for it. Prom Night, Jamie Lee Curtis, the Scream Queen, cements her role as the Scream Queen because that coming off of Halloween and her role in The Fog, and then she has Prom Night in 1980, and then also Maniac, which has been, kind of that's like a minor cult hit status in my head. I don't know if that would be more so in yours.
To be honest, I've never seen it.
But still, for like 1 year though, like that's a lot of interesting horror, and also I think the varying levels of pushing boundaries with what you could get away with showing on screen as far as gore and effects go in 1980.
So it's interesting. I actually I think on average, I actually think 70s horror is a little bit better than 80s. It's not really a contest.
No, I'm with you there.
No, I don't mean in it's not really a contest as in there's no contest. I mean in the sense that it doesn't have to be a contest. You can watch both.
Oh, no, but I'm saying I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because the 80s stuff has been interesting so far, but like I would go back and rewatch much more of the 70s stuff. All the stuff I've seen from the 80s where I'm like, yeah, I'm good. One and done.
But it is, you can see why it's sort of the iconic era that in a lot of ways the sort of modern horror industry or modern horror, well, I guess we could say we're sort of in a new era now, but has been springing off of or sort of bouncing off of since.
Well, for sure, because it's also, as we were talking, like in the mid 2000s, you had remakes galore of Friday the 13th, of Nightmare on Elm Street, of Last House on the Left, of like these classic ones, which is not an 80s one, but of the iconic ones of that roughly era. Everybody revisited to remake Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all that stuff in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I really wish they'd stop. I mean, they did. They did Black Christmas this year, which I admit I haven't seen. I shouldn't judge,
And The Craft. There's The Craft Legacy comes out shortly, which just looks like almost a scene-for-scene remake of the one from '96 we talked about previously as well.
I would be interested in a 2020 Craft that was actually trying to do something with it, because
maybe trailer looks terrible, but
I mean, this is it. It's like The Craft could be good.
Yeah. Well, the first one is, but I don't know.
Please stop cannibalizing. Everything's on fire, and the theaters are all going out of business, and like it's there's
it's rough out there. But then also, like, I think the 80s in my brain again, and I have a huge deficiency in 80s horror, which I'm trying to rectify here this month. I am going to move on after this particular episode to get some other stuff because I need something that isn't made in America in my eyeballs very soon. But it seems like it was just upping the ante in gore for a huge portion of the 80s. And then also it naturally gave birth to the Final Destination style series, where as you get into Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street as series specifically, it's all about like what's the method of killing? Like, are there good kills in that movie? Which is fine. I mean, that's a staple of the genre, but like it takes away the focus. Like the first Friday the 13th is it's actually a pretty interesting, I would argue, character study to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
could I just say I'll talk more next time about the movies that I've actually been watching, but inspired by it's been on my list for a long time, but inspired by your 80s focus, I watched House of the Devil.
The Ty West one.
The Ty West, which is playing
great.
which is great. It's a very good movie, and is totally playing with, the 80s satanic panic.
Yes.
And I was sort of thinking about you watching movies that were portraying the 80s the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that's actually all I have to say on it.
Well, no, that's actually the best version of what we can do. Maybe that's what I was saying, like our last episode when I was talking about watching repackaged 80s horror nostalgia from current filmmakers. I maybe like it better through that lens, because Summer of '84 was not a direct remake. House of the Devil is not a direct remake, but it's within like the mythos of that style of story that was being told in the 80s.
Well, it's also dealing with it's if the satanic panic was real, as opposed to a crisis of the American family as women start to go to work because of neoliberal capitalism.
Exactly.
Destroying the the sort of male breadwinner model, plus the obviously the women's movement as well.
Right. Also the economic necessity of like one income isn't enough anymore.
Yes.
Just our feature presentation for this particular episode is The Babadook from 2014, written and directed by Jennifer Kent. A single mother and her child fall into a deep well of paranoia when an eerie children's book titled Mr. Babadook manifests in their home.
Where'd you get this?
On the shelf.
If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. A rumbling sound, then 3 sharp knocks.
Babadook, dook, dook.
That's when you'll know he's around. You'll see him if you look. Nothing bad's gonna happen, Sam.
Did you think that about my dad before he died?
He sees things as they are, that one.
I promised to protect you if you promised to protect me.
Oh my God. Did he hurt anyone?
The boy has significant behavioral problems.
This monster thing has got to stop, all right? It's just a book. It can't hurt you.
You all right?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
You don't have to be fine, you know.
Just a bit stressed at the moment.
All children see monsters.
Not like this. I want to report someone stalking me and my child.
You can't get rid of the Babadook.
You can bring me the boy. You can bring me the boy. You can bring me the boy.
What do you want? You're trespassing in my house! I'm sick, Sam. I need help. It isn't real. It isn't real. It isn't real.
That's actually a perfect transition because as we get into the Babadook here, I noticed a very specific corollary to The Witch, which we did on our first episode, and that exactly what you just said there. What if, insert fear here, what if blank was true? As you're saying with House Devil, like, what if the Satanic Panic was true and was a thing? What if in The Witch, like, what if the witches in the Salem witch trials, the fear of the witch, the fear of the Satanists, the devil worshippers out in the woods was true? In the Babadook, you have, what if that creepy, children's book, or what if that creepy, monster under the bed tale was true?
Yeah. And what if it was actually just a symbol for the incredible difficulty of both mourning and dealing with a behaviorally out of control child?
Yeah.
So when we started this, I want to ask, as the parenting expert, because you're a parent.
By default.
By default, and I think, this is the thing, is the first time I watched it, I purely thought about the parenting. Obviously, there's something else going on here, which is dealing with the loss and so forth of a partner, and then
loss
the
of a
legacy
partner for sure,
and the legacy of having I almost wish it was literally just about the parenting. But could you empathize with this?
Empathize as a character or as a story, you mean?
As a parent watching her slowly lose it.
Kind of yes and no. The first time through watching it, no, not at all. Because it's such a masterwork of tone and building tension. And I love the layers that Jennifer Kent, the writer-director, puts onto this story of, is this real or isn't it real? And it's never played for like quick shocks or jump scares. The best example is when she finds that hole behind her refrigerator the bugs are crawling out of. And then she has to like scrub down the whole kitchen, and it's clearly just a hallucination she's having. I mean, not clearly at first. It's played for real.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the social workers come into the house and she references the hole in the wall and it's clearly not there, you're like, oh, this is someone who's losing a grip on what's real and what isn't. And it's never cheaply done. It's only done to build, I think, empathy with that character, because that character's about to get pretty horrific.
Right.
And that's a really interesting and a tough thing to not only just write, but also then perform and structure out as a story, that you're actually still with this woman the whole way through, even as she starts, getting pretty rough with her child. So the second time through, knowing the story, the first time through, it was just a visceral thrill ride. And that story is there. But the second time through, it was much more haunting. And I don't think I maybe empathize as closely, because it's not an emotional ringer I've ever had to go through. But I don't know that, specifically with this story, that being a parent really heightened it all that much for me. I think it's an effective storyteller, and it's an effective film that I think it places, it placed me mentally in the same space as probably anybody else watching it. So on the opposite end, Isaac, not having any children at this point in time, did it scare you away from ever thinking about children?
No. I mean, I've been around enough children. I have enough friends who have kids, and I like kids. I enjoy hanging out with kids, and I have that instinct. But what I thought is so effective and powerful about it, I mean, I think we should pull together the different elements, right? The elements of mourning and depression, but also the isolation of parenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, she can't get sexual fulfillment. She can't get emotional fulfillment outside of the parental role. He's shot as a monster at the beginning of this movie, right? The child is shot as a monster.
Oh, yeah.
He is the monster in this, in a lot of ways. And it's not, I mean, there's clearly relatively extreme behavioral issues that come from him having insecurities. It's not a missing father as in he has a missing father. That's not the reason he's messed up. The reason he's messed up is how his father died, and the fact that in many ways his mother has never really been able to come to terms with that, and that has affected him.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this feeling of this incredible sort of need to hold on to her and to protect her and to make that sure she never leaves him, and you know, so forth, right? I mean, he's got abandonment issues.
Well, he's seeking father figures, I think, as well within the film.
Does he?
Like, he's very quick to mention his dad pretty often to like total strangers at the grocery store. I think the social workers, when they come by, when they mention like, you know, he's finally celebrating his birthday on his birthday. Maybe not necessarily, maybe seeking is too strong of a word, but he's very aware I think what is he supposed to be 6 in this movie or in this story?
He's aware of the absence, but in some ways he doesn't seem to want another dad. Like, so for instance, when her friend from work who's like interested in her shows up, he doesn't really take any interest there. I think it's the figure of his father haunts their lives.
He does. And the other thing I noticed this time watching it was when she says, go watch your DVD, because she just needed a minute, you know, or whatever. I need a fucking break or whatever. The DVD that she's referencing must be something, and, you know, kids, as you're aware, like they love repetition. When they grab onto something they like, just again and again and again. He's watching like this magician's DVD, like How to Do Magic, which is a guy. And he clearly is modeled, like he has his top hat, he has his you know, cloak or whatever, and he's doing magic tricks throughout this whole story. So I think I maybe had read that as a bit of like seeking father figure or male role model, at least.
By the way, when I did that, in preschool I just watched Baryshnikov's The Nutcracker over and over on end. So as a 4-year-old, I would try to do Baryshnikov moves.
Awesome.
Yeah, it didn't work, but it was probably pretty cute. I mean, part of it is, you feel the abandonment issue. I mean, this is just a kid with like a lot of, so I guess to the original question of, I feel a lot of empathy for her. She is pressed to the wall. This kid is isolating her with her own sister, who frankly isn't supportive enough, but also is dealing with her, who is clearly not actually dealt with the death of her husband after all these years fully, partially because the child she has this child that reminds her of this all the time, and there isn't really a level of acceptance there. But then also just has, you know, it's like any situation with a kid with, you know, who really needs a lot of help, who has severe behavioral issues. It's not the kid's fault. It's, you know, it's what happened. He's a 6-year-old boy, but you're going to be run to the edge. And so like, what is the Babadook? When you read it from the parenting angle, the Babadook is that urge to just be free of all this stuff, right? I mean,
yeah, for sure. Well, even so like we mentioned on the previous episode about The Witch, how there wasn't a book that the family was using when they left the Puritan community, then went out into the woods to like make their own homestead. There was no built-in folklore that they were working with as like, oh, here's the book on like, you know, that I found in this out in the woods about witchcraft or whatever. Well, in this case, we actually get that. We get a children's book, which couldn't be more, the potential for that to be just like the most clunky bit of exposition was just sitting there. And luckily, Jennifer Kent is a smart writer-director and didn't go that route. She went fucking creepy as shit pop-up book and messed with it in the perfect way throughout the rest of the film, where like it's destroyed, it comes back. It even adds pages. It adds to the narrative. So it gives us like, how clunky could that be to like have them read the story of the Babadook and then just be like, oh, here's the myth right here laid out in simplistic children's book bullet point forms. Well, she even makes that terrifying, which is the hallmark of a great storyteller. But the fact that it also begs the question then within the narrative of, is this a manifestation of the mother's fears already? But because it is physically showing up, you know, at her front door on the bookshelf, you know, even after she rips it up and everything and tries to destroying it. So is that like the cockroaches in the kitchen? Was it even a real book? Well, she reads it to her son and he's clearly taken by the story.
I mean, I don't know. I think it kind
of doesn't matter, but
it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, I think it is real because the kid sees it. He has, you know, I think this is really happening right now. Part of it is it does operate completely at the level of metaphor. So, all right, we were saying what the Babadook is, and I was saying sort of it's the urge to kill your child.
I'm saying it's a simple children's book. That's all. Nothing to worry about.
Oh, man.
No, it is. It's pretty clear. Because like, again, it's one of those great stories that's got layers to it in which the first time through it works as an effective, like literally gives you goosebumps, thriller, chiller horror movie.
Right.
And then as you watch through the second time, you can actually kind of dive in there and be like, oh, like the first time through, I wouldn't have said, oh, it's all about repressed grief or whatever. But the second time through watching, I was like, oh, this is clearly the monster here is repressed grief, and she hasn't processed these feelings. And then even when you get to the climax where she's literally just screaming at this, Babadook, in the shadows, winged giant like image, and she's holding on her son, like, get out of my house. This is my son, whatever. She's so effectively bottled up all of these emotions and tensions throughout the whole movie that when she's just screaming her head off, like it's a hugely powerful and also very empowering scene for her.
Right.
And by the time it wraps up and she's just like keeping all these feelings, down in the basement, locked up, feeding it bugs or whatever that was in that bowl.
Well, tending to not ignoring her feelings anymore, dealing with
Right.
So here's the thing. I guess, and this is the part that I didn't get to when I was saying it's also like the urge to the difficulty of parenting, right? Like that drive to like, could I just be free of this and start my life over? And in some ways, and you're pointing out it's repressed grief. Is it both? I mean, is the Babadook in a sense?
Oh, for sure.
Both.
Yeah.
And part of it is that if you could get rid of this kid, then you could move on from your grief. But this kid is there shackling you to it. No, I think that's just it. Yeah. Well, part of it is it would with a different filmmaker, without it being so thrilling, this would all be so on the nose, including the stuff in the basement. All of it, it would just be like, ugh. But in this, it's just, so perfectly done.
Right. And I think because the way that she constructs the narrative, she doesn't. Amelia, the mother, and Samuel, her son, they defeat the Babadook as an entity when they work together.
Right.
And he even has her promise him at one point, like, I'll protect you, you protect me. And at one point, like you said, in the hands of a different director, you'd end up having like, oh, it's another demon child story. He's got her tied up in the basement when she goes, a little like, Jack Torrance level from The Shining, goes a little mad.
Yeah.
And he ties her up in the basement, but it's actually an act of love. And he's even telling her, like, I'm not leaving you. I said I would help protect you. And he's the only one literally in the world that believes in the Babadook at this point anyway. So he's literally the only one who can help her.
Right.
And then, he just caresses her face. She pukes up the black goo or whatever, very, 90s X-Files, imagery there. And it's like, oh, it's out. And then she's able to comfort him, protect him. And so they actually do what they had promised to do. He protects her, then she protects him.
So, well, part of it is like I was saying at the beginning of the movie and through the sort of the first half, he is sort of the monster you're dealing with. He acts like a monster, right? But as you grow empathy for him, you understand why he does what he does. And then there's
That's a great point. Sorry to interrupt real quick, because I actually even brought in my notes. This kid is a creepy little tiny Malcolm McDowell at the start of the movie.
He is. And then, but like you build the empathy, you understand why he's doing that, and he has a reversal. And part of it is there's this constant clinginess, right, with him. I mean, you can't even get one night to masturbate, let alone go on a date.
And what happens when she goes on like she goes and gets ice cream because her coworker is nice enough to like give her some time off or cover for her, whatever, and then she ends up like, oh, her sister was calling her because the kid creeped out, his cousin.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there's just nothing. There's no respite.
Barely got a moment, not even. Yeah.
But part of it is that then his clingingness, like that even when he does the "you protect me, I protect you" thing, it's still in the vein of his clinginess from the first half. But by the time you get to the end, when he's actually tied her up, it's reversed around to we are a family unit. We are family and we support each other and we love each other, and I'm never going to stop loving you because you're my mom.
Right. Well, because they actually start working together. Up until that point, not that she needs to go along with every like flight of fancy a child has, I guess, but like up until that point, she was on one track and like, oh God, like it's such a burden, and all of the hoops she has to jump through just to take care of him.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't working together at all.
I have a question, and she keeps she doesn't like it when people call him the boy. I mean, part of it is what's the subtlety of it is in that first half of the movie, she's putting everything she has in to try to support this kid. When the school wants him with a monitor, and she's just sort of totally rejecting of that, and I think that's portrayed as good parenting. I'm actually not sure I totally agree. This is a kid who brings projectile weapons to school. Like, maybe he needs more one. I mean, actually, what the school is actually offering him is a lot of one-on-one attention, which is probably what he needs.
It could be, but there's also not judging on her, no judgment on her decision there, but what that feels like from a parent point of view is you worry that your kid then is going to be labeled as that problem kid who needed that kind of intervention specialist at such an early age. That's its own form of isolating that kid. And then what's his future schooling going to be? I mean, she doesn't express that in the movie, but like that's something that ran through my head was like, you know, kids are evil little shits. So like that he's going to be now like that troubled kid who had to go to like the special class.
Well, and you see that with his cousin.
Right. And so I think it's her trying to like maintain like, no, I want a sense of normalcy for him. That's what I think will help out with this kid. That's what's going to happen.
Right. I mean,
that's what needs to happen.
Part of it is until his behavior is a little more under control. Like he is.
Oh, sure.
He has a crossbow.
Right. No, I'm not. But I mean, honestly, within the movie, it's, I think it works, but it's probably one of the more like on the nose narrative devices to get him isolated, which is he's withdrawn from school and is only home with mom now.
Yeah. And mom.
So you don't have a concerned teacher who like tries to get through to the kid. You know, you get rid of all that potential for the narrative to keep them isolated at home together.
Well, let's talk class politics.
Yes.
So this is a movie about a single mother who had a sort of more professional writing position, which, mind you, does not mean that you make any money. But is now a single breadwinner doing a very
Oh, they did mention that. I totally forgot about that at the birthday party.
Right, and during the birthday party with her sister, who clearly is in a stronger class position and who has friends who are upper class and look down on.
It's total like suburban upper middle class mommy club.
Right, that's exactly what it is, and she works. You know, if we think about our modern working, you know, what replaced the factories, right? What in the sort of neoliberal era? Now, this is a movie we haven't mentioned. This is a foreign movie. This is in Australia, and just because it's in English does not mean you're dealing with the same country.
Right.
But nonetheless, I suspect the dynamics can be pretty similar. I could be wrong. But you know, what replaced this factory? Well, you know, the medical industry, and specifically old folks' homes, and that's where she works. Right? She is an aide, and it is a brutal, hard job. I mean, part of it is that she takes care of this 5-year-old, and then she takes care of other people who, you know, and this is. I mean, when we're all old, we're going to need this help too. But you're then she does nothing but care work. That is
right.
All
that's what I was just thinking. Yeah.
24 hours a day.
Which gives you a great isolated and drained character.
Right. It's completely understandable why she's physically and emotionally drained all the time.
It's nothing but empathy and care for other people.
But, you know, and they live in this, you know, I guess this is the places where they lived before her husband died as well, because they're
well, there's memorabilia all around, yeah.
There's memorabilia, but it's also that their neighbor is the neighbor that they had, because the older woman who lives next door to them, who we should talk about as sort of a found family character, knew the husband and, you know, is a friend to their whole family unit and loves them. But I think, you know, the class politics of this, the sort of, they don't talk about her running out of money, but the pressure that she's under and the sort of labor that she does contributes heavily to what's going on here. And I don't think that's an accident at all.
No, I don't think so either. I hadn't really thought about it in a class term, so that's actually spot on, I think. I'd thought about it in the narrative terms, like we were saying. She's caring and working as best she can with the time she has with a kid who clearly needs some care and support, if not some professional help, as he's growing up here. Granted, it's also only a 6-year-old, and, you know, there's times when, like, you know, a totally well-adjusted 6-year-old is just going to like have a bad few days or a rough week or something. Right. And you don't necessarily know why, because they don't know they need to articulate some of the emotions and things that they're feeling. As also as a 6-year-old, this is like early on in schooling too. This isn't like real deep into elementary school at this point. It's a year or two in. But I really had thought about it mostly as like her care tank has just got to be on empty.
Right.
And she clearly looks physically frazzled the whole time too. Because also at this point too, as a single parent in her shoes, you expect it to get to a point maybe around 6 years old or so. Maybe that's why Jennifer Kent picked this as an age for this character. If it was a newborn, it's a very different movie. Right. If it's a 2-year-old, it's a very different movie. There's ages where you do need constant monitoring and care from the adults around you. In this case, one person.
And 6,
but by the time you get to 6,
they don't actually need as much attention as he's demanding.
You would ideally, you'd have a few moments to yourself. You're cool with like a babysitter and you get a night out or something like that, which is just not an option for her too. So even like as a parent of like a 2-year-old, you think like, oh, once I get a couple more years in, like I'll be able to like, you get to have a moment. And she's still not at that point yet. So yeah, I was like, well, her care tank is just totally on empty based on her job and her family position as well.
Well, I mean, like I said, I don't think the class position, and she brings this up, right? I mean, the class position combined with sort of her, it's the effects of losing an income that puts her in the position that she's in, right? She cannot maintain her sort of writing job because of this. So I guess part of it is the movie. I'm pulling more out of it than maybe even is intended, but sort of, it's the expansion of gendered care work, which is sort of what drives a lot of job growth in the United States and probably a lot of the Anglo-Saxon world, which is more precarious and not as well paying. And it's the precarity of, needing those two incomes, or else you're not going to be able to maintain this stuff.
Oh, for sure. Well, also, I don't think you are reading too much into it, because going back to that kind of affluent mommy club birthday party that she does take her son to, when he pushes the other girl out of the treehouse.
His cousin, yeah.
His cousin. So when she's there, like, she actually ends up expressly saying that when the other moms, like, they do a little, like, I don't feel like it's very true. So like a little bit of feigned concern about her and her situation. And then they go on with their normal chit chat routine. At that point, Amelia just pipes up. She's like, "Oh, woe is you, because you couldn't get like the right, food at the bakery." It was some very like, affluent kind of first world white people kind of problem that the moms were all like, "Oh my gosh, I know how you feel." Like, that was their level of stress. And then she chimes in like, "Do you remember that scene?"
Yeah, I do know exactly what you're talking about. What is it? It's they're stay-at-home moms. They're stay-at-home moms, and the complaint is that I don't even have time to go to the gym anymore.
That's what it was. Yes. Which was like totally, like, it puts you then very specifically, as you were pointing out. I think that's proof that is there right there in the narrative.
Yeah. Well, and
there's a different class to that.
And this is somebody who goes and helps disadvantaged people implicitly, like her, in the sense of, it's always losing the father.
Yeah.
So, it's a really, I mean, it's, once again, without the perfect tone control, that would not work. That would be way too much.
And it hits as harsh, and it should be harsh, because they're being assholes to her. And then she has a moment with her sister that's a bit more private, but she calls him out like, "This is fake concern for me. Shut the fuck up."
Right.
Well, also it's paralleling. It's a scene when, like I said, when Samuel pushes his cousin out of a treehouse because his cousin is being a brutal little asshole, as children can be,
right,
to him in the treehouse. He lashes out by pushing her. Well, his mom lashes out by yelling an insult.
Right. And
so,
yeah, and to be clear, his behavior is, pushing another child being mean to you, and you potentially putting their life at risk by pushing them out of a treehouse is not. These are all danger signs if you're dealing with a little kid.
Oh, for sure. But 6-year-olds react that way sometimes if they're. I mean, he was also literally cornered too.
Yeah, right. He can't. The problem is he can't get out. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the neighbor.
Yes.
So there's an older woman who lives next to them, who is the only adult who doesn't treat Samuel, the boy. She treats him with affection and love, and he seems to return it. And she knew the father, and she's not unnerved by him just speaking his mind or talking about death. She makes it clear throughout and reaches out when things start to spiral out, saying that I love both of you.
Yeah.
And in the end, I mean, she's there's the concept of found family. In a lot of ways, she's a closer family than the sister is.
Yeah, she's also providing the level of support to the sisters. And the sister very early on in the movie is like, "I can't watch him anymore. I'm done with this. I can't do it." And then, like you said, the neighbor is just like, yeah, come on over. I got it. And even as you were mentioning, kids, all kids that, are verbal at that age can just be very blunt and direct. The line that she has when the mom picks him up is, he asked about her MS, like why she shakes. So he explained, MS, and she's like, "Oh, that's rude. You shouldn't ask that," or whatever. But like the neighbor's fine with it. She's like, "No, he was just a curious kid." And then she references, "It's just like his dad."
Mm-hmm.
And then the mom immediately then is just like, clearly like doesn't want his name being mentioned. When it's a clear indication at that point in the narrative too of like, oh, she's just repressed all of this.
Right. When she says that she's gotten over it because she doesn't talk about him, that's not actually, yeah.
Right. So here comes the Babadook, meaning repressed grief or unprocessed grief, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's I hadn't really given that neighbor too much thought other than like it did have a level of, oh, there is someone who is concerned, and I thought it was a good counter character to the sister
Right.
of like, oh, here is someone who's sticking around and is offering some help, but also again, it's just great writing. She didn't give that character trait to someone who's like 30 and able-bodied and close to the family, like, the coworker character.
Right.
This was someone who really can't help out.
She can do childcare
Too much.
but not anything intensive. She's
Right,
she's
exactly.
MS. She's not moving,
And it's not going to provide any sort of outlet to the mom. Like if this was like again in the hands of a lesser filmmaker, the male coworker that Amelia has is clearly heading towards love interest territory.
Yeah, he's interested.
And in a lesser movie, the final scene would be she's dating him, and Samuel's having a birthday party, and everything's fine. We got a new family going. Thank God it doesn't go that route. And that's kind of shut down immediately. But that the hint is there.
Are you saying that just because we deal with one set of problems, that not everything is perfect?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Well, also I meant the trope of like you have to have a love interest subplot going.
Oh, that's true.
In
Yeah.
your movie, and I'm glad that's skewed in this one.
I mean, in some ways, he's there to show how claustrophobic her life is and how she's actually being closed in, because she desperately needs to get laid in the first half of the movie. And
I don't even know if she responds to him as like a love interest kind of way. Like I feel like he's not like overtly clear about it, but like as a narrative, we're like, oh, this would be the love interest here.
Yeah,
he cares.
Yeah, he's trying to reach out, and build something here, and it's like, well,
yeah, or it could be a love interest. So as like originally we were looking at a few different themes for our art house horror episodes here this October, and this one was in the category of, was it like parental paranoia, or this isn't like demon seed evil child territory?
Well, I was actually sort of doing, I mean, parental paranoia is good. I was just going for parenting in general.
Okay.
Because, and the easy thing to do is the demon seed thing, because, yeah, like we said, I think last episode, like half of the 70s horror movies are just, like children of the devil issues, which, we get it.
Yeah. I just don't have too much interest in that genre.
I like it. I find it fun. But
well, I guess it's just so repetitive now, and it's not. We could go back and get some original ones, but yeah.
No, in the 70s it's interesting. Now it's great. I think parenting, and I think parenting paranoia actually fits pretty well in here.
Well, at least it does happen certainly for this one.
Yeah. So, what did you choose?
So I think I mentioned earlier, I desperately, because I was watching a lot of American 80s stuff, was like, I desperately need to hear a foreign language when I'm watching movies pretty regularly, and I haven't done that for 5 or 6 days, so it's driving me a little bit nuts. I wanted to recommend one, again, the previously mentioned Art House Theater we used to work at together. There's one that played there in 2014 called Goodnight Mommy, from directors Severin Fiala and Veronica France. That's twin boys, fairly creepy. They move into a new home with their mother after she has, cosmetic surgery, like plastic surgery. And she spends a good portion of the movie in bandages. And so the fear that these kids have, the two boys, the twin boys have, is that, is this or isn't this their mom still after the surgery?
Mama?
So this one is interesting because it's more of like child paranoia towards the parent than parental paranoia.
So I have not seen it. I've seen the previews multiple times. It's on the list. What's sort of interesting about this is this isn't a classic. This is actually part of the art horror wave. In this case,
it is
not an American entry, but it totally, it's very much playing in the same playground as the movie that we chose. And it's supposed to be one of the better regarded of out there.
Oh, I mean, I was creeped out so many times during it. I wanted to say too that it's also expertly crafted in probably actually in the vein of The Witch and I think also Babadook, where it's sort of, I don't want to say it's building its own mythology. I mean, obviously it is because it's building its own narrative, but the first scene is like interesting, but like the little hints that you get very early on that something's off are really interesting. And then it just ratchets up and up. And it's one of those, that if you took out like scene 18 of the movie, if there's like, let's say there's like, 50 scenes in the movie, if you took out scene 18, the rest of it wouldn't quite work the same. Like it's so meticulously crafted and layered and built scene by scene as it goes along. The mood, the tension, the paranoia, the creep level is astounding. And it's one of those that, like, if you've never heard of it or you don't know much about it, I'm obviously not going to spoil anything here, but like it's one of those great, like you'll just feel yourself tensing up the farther you get into the film, and then you realize like, oh God, like I'm kind of sore. I've just been, sitting here tense, like waiting for this to like completely unravel or have a payoff, which it does.
I love a Jenga movie. Like one where it's like every element is so perfectly tied together and it all hits that final point and you're like, anything off and this Jenga pile will collapse.
And it's not going to work. So,
but well,
what do you have?
Oh boy. I feel a little weird about this choice, but it is about parenting technically. I chose Wes Craven's first film, the 1972 counterculture gone bad shocker, Last House on the Left. And I should just say that this is a movie that portrays a fair amount of sexual violence along with gore. And it is not an easy movie to watch.
Marie and her friend.
I feel like a woman for the first time in my life.
Two girls from the suburbs going to the city to have a good time.
Oh, this is my roommate, Sam.
Hi, girls.
This is my sister, Martha. Martha, these girls, want to buy some grass.
Four killers on the loose, also looking for a good time.
And the road leads to nowhere.
They meet in the last house on the left. What began as a birthday party ends as a nightmare.
I want to give you something.
I don't want that.
It's worth a lot.
I don't want
See? I want to be your friend.
Oh, you want to get free.
I want to be your friend. Are you all right?
Yeah. Hey, I'm fine.
Just what did happen in the last house on the left? Dr. Collingwood lived there.
Are you sure we're not going to put you folks to any trouble? Oh, nonsense. Our home is yours.
His wife lived there.
I've always dreamed of a man who could take me easily.
So did their daughter, Marie. They all lived there.
Junior.
To avoid fainting, keep repeating to yourself, it's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie. Last house on the left.
It's no I Spit on Your Grave, but it is rough.
It is rough. And part of what's amazing about it, and I'm sure very polarizing about it, is the way he plays with tone. And the reason I say it's sort of counterculture gone bad is that there is sort of a clash of generations in the beginning. Basically, it's a sort of, they're actually not in the suburbs; they're practically in the country. I mean, it must be New York, but basically a nice middle class girl in 1972 going out with her friend who's a little tougher and comes from more of a working class background to a concert. Parents are letting them go out. They have a little bit of generational back and forth at the beginning about, what's appropriate to wear. But basically, these are the cool parents, right?
Yeah.
Like they give her a peace necklace as a present, like they're cool. They're very sympathetic. And then they run into an over the top gang of violent serial rapists. The leader of which's son is part of the gang. This is something I didn't even realize, even though it's said explicitly in the text of the movie, but it's just sort of hard to believe because they don't actually, the ages don't look right, frankly. Like, they all look like they're like 20 to 25 in this gang. Well, one of them looks like he could be in his mid-30s, but like, they look like out of control. They could be out of control hippies at this point. But basically, they're a gang of like rapists and robbers and murderers who take them captive, assault them, rape them, and then murder them, in some harrowing scenes, also with a lot of resistance. This is not just like the girls are not just like victims. They fight back in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And then I'm just giving away the whole plot because you might as well. And then it turns out that the woods that they've taken them is right next to the sort of point of view girl's house, and their car has broken. The sort of rapist thieves' car has broken down, so they end up sleeping at the house of her parents, who then realize that they're the ones who have killed her daughter, and then the parents dispatch them with a chainsaw, biting off one of their dicks, some electrocution. There's a lot. It's quite an ending.
I was given that preface before I watched it for the first time, and it's still shocking.
Yeah,
it doesn't lessen the punch of the visceral effect of the movie, knowing what may or may not be coming your way in this case.
For me, I mean, this is one of the movies that if we had, and I keep bringing back the ghosts of our 60s summer, if we'd gotten our 60s summer up to the actual end of the 60s, which is like the mid 70s.
I know, it's 1972. You keep saying that.
I'm going to keep saying it, and it's not a criticism of what we did. It's just saying that, like, this is one of the movies that we probably would have ended up doing, because it really is.
Oh, for sure.
I feel like it is even though in some ways our rapists are supposed to be sort of outside. They may be too old to be part of it, but they aren't. Like, they're clearly like this stuff going back. There's references to feminist movements. There's sort of references to cultural revolution going on. The subtext is, I don't know how to, it's like Wes Craven is not a reactionary figure, but it's hard to say that it's like, you let your, I don't know. Is there a systemic point that like you let your daughters out and take part in this world, and this is what happens because every society is spiraling out of control? I'm not actually sure that would be the reactionary take on it. It also just is the randomness of it. And part of what's so jarring about it isn't just the violence. It's that it takes the sort of playfulness that you find of the irreverence. Like, there's literally songs, jaunty tunes throughout saying what's happening. Like singing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like it isn't what it is. The bumbling cops keep like trying to get a ride and just get fuck off, pig, or whatever. Like, people are just messing with them. Like, it's a goofy movie, except that it's not at all.
I would say, yeah, no.
But it is about parenting, which is why it's on theme, right? Because the parents are. It's about the anxiety of parenting. It's about dealing with that to a certain degree. I mean, even the end of it, like, it shows the different characters, including the actresses who have just been murdered. I mean, not the actresses themselves. It plays the jaunty tune with them smiling while it cues their names at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are you supposed to feel with this? And I think in some ways that's what makes it interesting in art and experimental. At the same time, it's really fucked up and understandable. People don't want to deal with it. But is it a good horror movie about parenting that doesn't involve either, demons, and actually involves some good parental relationships that just, tragically,
Well, it's got kind of like two worlds there. So one, you do have the parents and how they're interacting with their teenage kids at the beginning of the movie. And then unbeknownst to them, this horrible thing happens. And then once they realize what happened, you have the parental decision of, do I go to the authority figures and let the justice system do whatever it's going to do? Or like you said, do I just whip out the chainsaws and murder these fuckers right now and dispatch of them post haste? Because that would be, like that, stepping into like parents' shoes there for that would be immense. That would, like, your first thought, if you were like, oh, I know for sure they killed my kid. They're here right now in the house. I'm taking care of this right now. So it's almost like an interesting, like, parental revenge fantasy to a horrific event.
It is so to go into the reactionary direction that this could go, it is the parental revenge fantasy after this culture has stolen your kids. even though you're the
Ooh,
cool.
there you go. Okay, yeah.
Even though, you know, you're the cool kids. I mean, you're the cool non-square parents who let you go to the concert all night and like just give you some
Right.
shit because your nipples are sort of showing.
Yo, I see. That's your counter. Okay, I see. Yeah, so that's the counterculture read that you were having at first, which is true. It's there, but it's not. But it feeds into a different kind of cultural thing that would come up, which wasn't around at all as far as I remember in the 70s. I think we talked about that as a theme in the 90s horror films of like the serial killer or like the random psychos that are out there. Although I guess Psycho was out there in 1960, but these are just the random psychos that like your daughter, the fear when your teenagers head out there into the world that like, oh, some random psycho is gonna pick them up, grab them, and kill them.
I mean, I think that gets made routine in slashers to a certain degree.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, even if you think about something, I mean, I'm just thinking about the 70s. Like if you think about something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's just like you just go to the random wrong place, right? And
right.
But I think with this, it's that you do. This is what I mean about like, yeah, their ages aren't right, even though actually they look like they're perfectly the right age, but it is like the sort of counterculture gone bad sort of thing. They even have the patter that you get with sort of like the irreverent humor of, sort of pretty dumb, irreverent humor, like the rapist gang of that you sort of expect out of like young people who are breaking out of the system at that time,
mm-hmm.
even though they're not that, right? In the movie, they're not actually that. But it
Right.
actually fits with my first choice, Season of the Witch from last episode, for the alternative in that, it's the challenge of this stuff it's the challenge of a changing society in the early 70s to the sort of middle class family unit. And all right, that ties both of those films together. But in different ways.
It does. But also, I think maybe with some of your struggle with trying to kind of evaluate it is like because it's almost two films put together. So you have like kind of the initial like say first half is sort of like the torture porn, grotesque horrors of the world thing, but then the other half would be like how the parents deal with that on their own without going to any sort of authority figure.
Right. I think that's there, and I think that's actually what's going on. But part of it is within the text of the film, they literally don't have a choice because, all right, maybe they do, because their phone isn't working and their daughter had taken the car. So
I mean, there's enough narrative devices placed there where it's like, also it's the rage of a parent who's just like,
yeah,
this happened.
It's not like they talk about doing anything else other than like, oh, they killed it. Okay, we're going to kill them.
Right. All this because Wes Craven saw the right Bergman film at the right time.
I mean,
I love it.
Well, the thing is this, Wes Craven was a very interesting director, really smart guy, a lot going on there. And, it's a hell of an...
I totally forgot he passed away until you just said it that way.
Yeah, no, he's been dead for a few years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more of his movies that we should probably do, especially in terms of politics. If you want political horror,
oh yeah,
I don't know, The People Under the Stairs, whew, right?
Yeah.
But he, he's a really interesting figure, and this is a hell of a debut.
Oh, for sure. Because this one too, like I don't know how much of this is actual fact, but there was all these there's stories surrounding this movie where like back in the day when this came out, everything was obviously projected on film on 35 millimeter. And I remember hearing, I don't even remember where I heard this at, but like that he had separate or a specific like dedicated kind of editing suite set up that as prints were returned distribution wise and then would go out again, that they would run through them because as people were editing, you'd either splice together reels on a platter system, which wasn't really... It was coming into use a lot in the 70s. I don't know that it was necessarily out there everywhere, but multiplexes used them for sure. It wasn't reel to reel, the way you'd see it in like, portrayed in old movies, that scenes were cut out. So you'd have these used prints that would come back and they'd be like, oh my God, that scene's, it'd be cut out. If like basically projection censorship to a certain extent. So they would run through the prints to make sure everything was there. And if not, they would, rebuild the print to make sure that it went out to the next place intact as well. I also remember that supposedly, I think it was in one of the Roger Ebert books, he talked about how he was one of the few reviewers that gave it like I want to say like 3 or 3.5 stars. Like he gave it a really good review, and he got a lot of hate mail from people like, how could you give this trash such a great review and blah, blah, blah. That one I know for sure is a fact. The editing part, I don't know. I'd heard that somewhere, but I know Roger Ebert got some shit, at least via mail, because he gave this movie a good review in 72.
Well, he was right. And I think
he was right.
I mean, and Roger Ebert is one of those figures that I actually disagree with a lot, and I think oftentimes don't get these sorts of things, but which may be unfair to him. But in this case, I also can totally see him getting this movie.
Yeah. Well, I think we brought it up a lot in the 60s episodes. He and Pauline Kael being two personal favorite critics that I like reading. I think maybe he falls in that Pauline Kael category for you, the way that I talk about Pauline Kael being like, I loved her writing, I love her reviews, but I rarely agree with her. But it's somebody whose take and whose interpretation I do always seek out just to see, like, well, I wonder what she said about that one.
Right.
Whereas Roger Ebert, I did line up with a bit more often because he was their champion, Martin Scorsese, from his very first film, and that's one of my all-time favorite directors. So I was at a nice soft spot for Roger Ebert, but also he was just so prolific as well, and he had a good turn of phrase when he was reviewing a film. Mainly, actually, he's really good for his bad reviews too. When he would take down a film, it was a joy to read.
I actually have a book that my parents gave me when I was a teenager of his bad movie reviews.
Oh, I have them too. I hate this film.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah,
I haven't looked at it recently to see how much I agree with all of it, but oh man, you're just reading through and it's like, that is.
Yeah. Even if you don't agree with it, it's still like, it's just a fun read because the guy, I mean, he won a Pulitzer for film criticism. He's a great writer. Anyway, we're off on a wild tangent there with that, but yeah, he nailed it with Last House on the Left in 72. What do we got for our next episode, Isaac?
Well, this is, I believe, the last of our very brief tour through Art House Horror, and I think we're going to go for one of last year's great. I mean, this is a very good year for Art House Horror, but we're going to go for, we're going to go for Midsommar, Ari Aster's second film.
Just to be very crystal clear about it, I have still not seen Midsommar, so I'm going to watch it for the first time for this show. I'm going to the director's cut, which came out actually in theaters after the initial release. Ari Aster did a full director's cut, I think 20 more minutes into the film.
Oh shit!
So that'll be the one I am watching for this episode.
I'm gonna have to. I don't think the version I have right now is that. I'm gonna have to find that because I think we should watch the same movie. I originally saw it in theaters at our former workplace. That'll be an interesting one.
With the overall topic being, cults as well, and the long history of cults and how they're represented in film, specifically in, within the horror genre.
Right. I'll just say that I'm going to try really, really hard not to choose The Wicker Man as my backup film, but wow, would I really like to talk about The Wicker Man. Even though it's such an obvious choice for this, it's just, I mean, the original Wicker Man. We're not talking about the Nicolas Cage memes.
Not the Nicolas Cage one, right. All right, until it's cult time on our next episode, my name is Aaron Spears.
My name is Isaac Miller, and stay safe out there for all the reasons which I have enumerated for months. Basically, none of them have changed.
Yeah, there's just more and more things to add to your list.
Right? Oh my gosh.
That's going to be a long sign-off by the time we get to the end of 2020.
Oh, man. It can't come soon enough.